woodshed. The former budget director going long here to get to the bottom of fixing this mess down there. David, good to have you.
Glad to be here.
Well, what is it? Is it a cliff? Is it a hill? Is it a bump? What is it?
Well, I think it's a thundering day of reckoning.
Oh, that's new. We can't fit that in a Chiron. Not too many letters.
Too many letters. But we've been kicking the can down the road on everything for a decade. So every tax cut, tax credit, tax stimulus, tax gimmick that anybody's ever thought of is going to expire New Year's Eve this year. $100 billion of sequester on defense and non-defense spending will hit. Unemployment insurance extension, which there's millions of people receiving today, will stop. So when you add all that up, it's $700 billion. It's nearly 5% of GDP on an annualized basis. It's going to hit the economy like a ton of bricks. There's going to be broken furniture flying in every direction. And I'm not confident the political system has the capacity to deal with a whirlwind this massive.
So why are the markets so sanguine through all of this? Are they just focused more on the election right now and the Scarlett O'Hara thing? They'll worry about that tomorrow or what?
Well, there's no one at home on Wall Street. These are basically robots trading word clouds being emitted by the Federal Reserve or other central banks of the world. They trade day to day, hour to hour, based on the latest nuance and word. They're not even looking in a serious way at the magnitude of this and at the persistence of this. In other words, it won't be a one-day event, a one-time event, a one white-knuckle
Well, I don't know.
moment.
Some of them are. Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase says he's marshaling for it. This is from earlier today, Jamie Dimon. I want you to react to this.
We're forming now a fiscal cliff war room, command center, and all that kind of stuff, going through to make sure we understand all of it, and we'll be prepared. I mean, J.P. Morgan will survive a fiscal cliff, and I just think it's terrible policy to allow it to get close.
Prepared for something bad.
Well, I think they're prepared, but I really disagree.
What would a brokerage firm, an investment bank, more to the point, have to do to be prepared?
Well, I'm not sure, except to the extent that they have a multi-trillion-dollar balance sheet, all of which will be impacted if there's a sell-off in risk assets of every class.
So it would be a meltdown environment.
If there's a sell-off in
and a couple of $100 million, which he's setting aside, won't cover a roundhouse on a checking account.
That's right. It may not be enough, but the whole market is now being propped up by the belief that the Fed, come hell or high water, can keep things on an even keel and stable. And if they ever lose confidence in the Fed, that it can keep the bond rate down to 1.7, that it can keep the stock market, operating on fumes. If they ever lose confidence in that, I think there'll be a tremendous breakdown of the whole system.
All right, so the Fed is keeping this fiction alive, right?
Right.
So if interest rates were to suddenly soar, if it looked like Washington would approach to defaulting or worse,
right,
setting off a spiral of selling on the dollar, all bets are off. Do you envision that?
Someday it's going to happen. It's only a question of when.
How about December 31st?
Well, I don't know that it'll be December 31st because they will find some way to kick things down the road.
But what I've heard is a 6-month extension, everything including the upper rate, 6 months, let a new president or a reelected one hash this out in the new year. What do you think of that?
Well, that might happen, and then that means on June 30th you're going to be in the same position. You're going to be in a position regardless of who's elected.
And they'll wait until the last minute.
But of a president who doesn't have a mandate to do anything. If Romney's elected, he says, I'm not going to cut defense. What is he talking about? It's $700 billion. We're broke. We can't afford this massive defense establishment.
$700 billion every year.
It left over from the Cold War. He said, I'm not going to touch Social Security. He pledged that. That's $800 billion. It's the heart of the entitlements. If you're not going to attack entitlements, how are you going to deal with this problem?
But maybe all you have to show is a direction, right? Bill Clinton did that in 1993 with a plan that showed real spending slowing and deficits curbing. And he didn't solve it overnight. And I'm not saying he did it alone, but he gave the markets a sense of direction and assurance. If they do that, isn't much of the monkey off their back?
I don't think so, because it's 20 years later and we've had a party like there's never been a party before. We are now objectively 20 trillion in debt. In other words, they say the number is 16 trillion, but there's so much built into the pipeline that it'll be 20 trillion before a new president could even get to that June 30 date that you're talking about. Furthermore, it is being financed at incredibly low interest rates because the Fed has its thumb heavily on the scale. In other words, we're borrowing today 5-year money for the Treasury at 70 basis points. It's a rounding error. That can't last. So if you have 20 trillion of debt and interest rates begin to normalize over the next 2 or 3 years, there's another $500 billion of spending that we're going to have to cope with that isn't even in the numbers today. And if you put all of Washington together, you could put all of Romney's prospective cabinet together, if there is one, they couldn't come up with 500 billion of cuts to deal with the hidden interest that's not even
well,
in the
maybe they can.
today.
They secretly know they're just not sharing it.
Well, they have a secret plan.
All right.
Okay, but
and they're just not sharing. Hang on there.
Yeah.